Protected Speech with Ravi Kapur and Jonathan Choe.
Alongside Jonathan Choe, I'm Ravi Kapur for another edition of Protected Speech, and we're going to start the program off with another clash between India and China along their border. It's a story we've been covering for the last couple of years. They've had multiple clashes. This one, a little minor compared to some of the previous skirmishes, but once again, India and China engaged in a battle along that line of control. It's a disputed border. It's been going on, really. They've had a disputed border for decades. But it's interesting how these clashes have really popped up in just the last couple of years. And of course, as you may know, India also has a disputed border with Pakistan. So Jonathan, once again, India and China doing battle and using sticks rather than actual guns.
Yes, sticks, spiked clubs, allegedly, hand-to-hand combat. I read that some of the Chinese soldiers were using these iron monkey paws. Essentially, they're clubs with animal paws on them at the end to hit some of the Indian soldiers. I mean, it's absolutely wild and out of control. I don't know. These skirmishes just continue. There's so much tension at this disputed border, and it just continues to happen. I'm surprised that more lives aren't being lost. And by all accounts, at least in this case, no one died, but a few soldiers injured. But this continues to happen, and I don't know what instigated this last episode.
Well, again, you have a premier in China who effectively has a lifetime appointment. So he's got border disputes with a number of countries. It's not just India. I don't think he's just picking on India, but there are issues with Hong Kong, with Taiwan. You go across. He's got issues with Russia. So when you talk about the Chinese stance on territory, they want to make sure they've preserved their territory and potentially expand into other regions. So I don't know if this is specifically targeted towards India, but obviously this is a different India because China and India have actually gone to a real war, and China came out on top. And India, under this prime minister and under Prime Minister Modi, they're clearly not going to back down at all. And even though they do have diplomatic channels still open, it's very clear both of these leaders are not going to back down.
Yeah, look, God forbid any lives are lost, but I just found it interesting the last few clashes and skirmishes. It's just been kind of hand-to-hand combat. I'm really surprised that both sides have been able to restrain themselves and not fire all these shots. Again, both of these countries are heavily militarized, and I'm just surprised that these situations haven't escalated beyond these skirmishes. But really, it's only a matter of time. They're due. And don't get me wrong, there have been casualties in the past year at this disputed border. But again, I'm just trying to understand why this continues, why this sort of stance at the border right now, and why there isn't a breakthrough, why there isn't any more negotiation going on right now. And again, these skirmishes that continue to pop up maybe, every few months or so.
Yeah, I mean, it's challenging because we're talking about mountains, and then don't forget, China took over Tibet, and Tibet was that buffer, another buffer, just like Nepal is, between India and China. And so once China subsumed Tibet, that changed the dynamic, and all of a sudden it's opened up a whole lot of problems for both sides over the years. And they've not only fought wars, but China still claims a lot of this region. I mean, even parts of India that have been under Indian reign for 75 years, China believes that's still part of China. So
they finally put out a statement saying they're aware of what's going on. They're closely monitoring the situation. But I'm just wondering, when does the U.S. get involved, right? They can't let this, just continue like this. If more people are going to die. Right now, again, this was a skirmish, hand-to-hand combat with sticks. I mean, it almost seems primitive, right? In this day and age, when we have drones and robots who could be going there, that both countries have sent men to man this border, and they're turning into these fist fights,
Well, I think they don't want to escalate it because the reality is if you start to use real weapons beyond sticks and stones, this can turn into an issue where you're affecting millions of people, right? Because neither country is going to back down. They'll start using missiles, and then this will turn into a bloody battle to the end. So I think that both cultures are pretty sophisticated, have been around for centuries. They have rich traditions on both sides of the border. I think cooler heads should prevail, but again, strategically, both leaders in India and China want to seem powerful to their respective constituents, and so thus we have another border battle. And you are correct. I think in terms of the U.S., I don't think the U.S. will ever get involved because it's just too sticky for the U.S. to get involved. The U.S. has too much at stake in the Chinese relationship and increasingly the India relationship. And then don't forget about Pakistan. China and Pakistan have a very strong alliance, and of course, India and Pakistan have been at odds for 75 years too. And the U.S. has been allies with Pakistan this entire time. So that's what makes the math so calculated, and why India continues to have relationships with Russia, with Iran, countries that don't have friendly relations with the United States. So that's another dynamic that will continue. Another story we've been following now for weeks, which initially a lot of folks didn't realize how big of a deal it is, but the FTX scandal broadens, and they've actually arrested the founder of FTX, Sam Bankman Fried. Not only was he arrested in the Bahamas, but he was extradited, and so he will be he's up on charges from the Securities and Exchange Commission, which had to really slowly go through the process of figuring out what happened. But I'm going to read a little bit of the indictment that the SEC put out there. The SEC charged Sam Bankman-Fried with orchestrated a scheme to defraud equity investors in FTX, and that's what I think an interesting dynamic here. The SEC says there were 90 investors. SBF raised $1.8 billion from these equity investors, including 90 investors from the U.S., just over $1 billion from U.S. investors. So this was a global scheme based in the Bahamas, but SBF grew up in the Bay Area. His parents were Stanford professors, very sophisticated, and a very small operation. And what's interesting is one of the key turning points into get the Bahamian authorities to arrest Sam Bankman-Fried was the co-CEO, Ryan Salome, actually tipped off Bahamian authorities, had SBF arrested, and he basically had told regulators only 3 individuals at FTX had the ability to move funds, and that other company that SBF controlled, Alameda, only 3 people had control to be able to engineer fraudulent transfers between FTX and Alameda, and that would be Bankman-Fried, Gary Wang, and Nishad Singh, who we've been following, another Bay Area guy who we've profiled here on Diya TV for a decade. It's fascinating how intertwined this thing is and how small everything is in the end.
Well, I was shocked that the authorities finally moved in. For a while, Sam Bankman-Fried was going on a media tour. He was going on every single show, talking to reporters, saying he did nothing wrong, and then boom, this bombshell news that he was now being extradited from the Bahamas to face U.S. authorities, and this happened just one day before he was set to testify before Congress. Again, this is shocking news, but I think I just want to be a fly in that room. What's Sam Bankman-Fried thinking? His parents were there in court with him. You mentioned he grew up in the Bay Area. He also went to school in the Boston area, went to MIT. His parents, again, renowned professors at Stanford. They understand tax law. They're going to be walking with him. But, it almost feels like right now this is Bernie Madoff 2.0. Of course, Bernie Madoff convicted of running the largest Ponzi scheme arguably in U.S. history, and now this. The story here really is what happened to what happened to the money of all these investors into FTX, right? Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank fame, he was not only a spokesperson but an investor. He lost more than $10 million. He's really been a staunch defender of Sam Bankman-Fried up until this point. But now he's even starting to wonder what happened to the money. And again, up to this point, there's now a new CEO, and apparently everything's been turned off, right? So you can't, track all this right now. So the moment everything gets turned back on, hopefully there's a ledger. Hopefully this can all be tracked, because at the end of the day, it's about now getting the money back to the investors. Whatever happens to SBF and the rest of the team, that's up to the law at this point. But I'm more interested in finding out what happened to the money.
And what's interesting about this is that it's shaken up the entire sector, right? Crypto was expanding. A lot of young people in their 20s thought, hey, this is my chance to 10x, 100x my money, right? Let me invest in some random coin and it scales up a little bit. Boom, I can flip it, make some money. And I have met people, I literally met a barber who told me, hey, I put some money in a cryptocurrency and I made $1 million and I'm gonna, keep working, but I bought a house. And I was an unbelievable story of
You
how
cashed
people made
out at
money
the
with
right
crypto.
time because we know Shiba Inu, that coin, Dogecoin. I mean, these were not even worth a penny. They're worth fractions of a penny. So imagine buying into that, but then it goes up to a penny, 2 cents, 3 cents, 4 cents, 5 cents. That's how you 10x your money. And that's what's been going on. And the big concern is now contagion, right? They keep talking about how is this going to impact the rest of this fledgling industry, because blockchain is very real. You have institutional investors who are all in on this. Kathy Ark, a renowned investor, again, defending crypto and Bitcoin, saying, that's why Sam Bankman Fried didn't want to have anything to do with Bitcoin because it's decentralized. He was more concerned about touting his own coin and the FTX platform and so on and so forth. The CEO of Coinbase also coming out pretty much accusing SBF of being a criminal. So right now you have so many in the industry distancing themselves from Sam Bankman-Fried, and they're trying to, again, say crypto is alive and well. It isn't going anywhere. We've got to move on from this bad actor.
And I think you're talking about Kathy Wood from ARK.
Kathy Wood from ARK Investment.
Right, who became very famous for betting on Tesla. But a lot of these folks have taken a hit. We've seen the overall stock market collapse, and then all these side bets. I mean, the crypto industry has been crippled. We've seen companies in the United States, Coinbase, another really big firm. I know one of the principals there at Coinbase.
It's institutional investors going all in. So think about it. They have so much skin in the game. They don't want to see their investments evaporate.
And Coinbase has gone out of the way to run advertising saying, hey, we're based in the U.S., we're regulated by the feds, we have quarterly earnings reports, everything is transparent. They're trying to save the industry. And if you look at the other piece of this, Binance, which is now the largest crypto outfit.
That's a monopoly right now.
They're in big trouble because, we just had CZ, the founder of Binance. He just went on CNBC to kind of quell some of this fire. And they just asked him flatly if there was a run on the bank effectively, could you give $2 billion back? And he kind of hemmed and hawed about whether he could do it. He said, well, we have good attorneys. But the reality is if there's a run on the bank, as there was at FTX, if any of these things, go down, I mean, we don't have a proper FDIC in place for crypto. And that's another aspect that I wanted to get into is that it does seem like Binance, that what Kevin O'Leary said in that testimony he had, that Binance kind of tipped FTX over the ledge, so to speak. They got enough information about FTX's vulnerability, and they are competitors, even though Binance invested in FTX. That hey, let's just get rid of my competition. It damages the entire industry, but hey, whatever's left, I get to own. Maybe that was the math here for CZ for Binance, but man.
Yes. And CZ was if that was truly his intent, right? These are all allegations. CZ, just to be clear, has never admitted to trying to undercut his competitor by destroying the entire platform. But basically, CZ leading up to the collapse of FTX, saying, "Hey, I'm in the process now of liquidating my. I believe the FTX token was called FTT. I'm in the process of liquidating my investment." That spooked the entire space. FTT's value started collapsing. And then CZ comes in as this white knight offering to save the FTX platform. But then CZ says, after looking at the books of FTX, I wouldn't touch this with a 10-foot pole. So that deal collapses. And hence, this is where we're at. So it was a brilliant play from the standpoint of trying to undercut your competitor, if that was the intent of making these strategic moves, to the point where SBF even went on Twitter to say to CZ, well played, right? I don't know if you remember that tweet, but this is there's just a lot of intrigue right now around what's going on, and I'd love to see what happens once this all shakes out. But there are now, criminal charges SBF now facing over this, so this is very real. It's no longer a game.
And the last piece of this, for all of the old timers who were critical of crypto, they certainly look smart. Obviously we saw Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett kind of laugh off Bitcoin, laugh off cryptocurrency. But I'm also wondering there are also vested interests, right? The Federal Reserve, all the folks that run these banks around the globe, they don't want to see the global economy go to crypto, right? And so some of the stuff they're spurring this on, right? I mean, do we really want to have a whole other industry controlled by other folks, right? I mean, the entrenched powers that be, even though they've invested in digital tokens, I think they'd probably like to see status quo as well. That's at least another critique that I've been reading about. Let's move on to a story that you've broken once again, Jonathan, on the beat in Seattle once again. Break it down for us.
Yeah, just an unbelievable story. I actually got wind of this by accident. I was in court last week in Seattle for another case, and I saw the judge talking about a fentanyl bust. Now, fentanyl, unfortunately, is just this opioid that has just been ravaging the streets of America, entire generation dying. I've reported on this extensively, especially impacting the homeless crisis in some of these major U.S. cities like Seattle, San Francisco, Portland. And I've been focused on this neighborhood in Chinatown. It's called Little Saigon, predominantly Vietnamese. And I've been following the black market of stolen items and goods. There's this vicious cycle that's been going on. The addicts who desperately need this fentanyl, otherwise also known as blues, they've been going into stores and stealing items like meat, toys, luxury handbags, and selling them for pennies on the dollar so they can buy more blues. So authorities, after spending months in this Little Saigon neighborhood in Seattle, using undercover officers, finally went in and busted a Vietnamese couple. And get this, and this is what's so sick, allegedly, these folks went in and were trading fentanyl pills, targeting the homeless, and trading fentanyl pills, allegedly, for food stamp cards. Okay? Food stamp cards, essentially food stamp fraud going on here. And in turn, this couple not offering money necessarily, but fentanyl pills, which would then addict even further these vulnerable people, the homeless who need help getting off the streets. And again, the cycle continues. So this couple now off the streets, they parked their car, according to authorities, in this Lamb Seafood parking lot. They'd set up shop there. They'd look for vagrants or transients or homeless people who likely wanted to, again, sell their EBTs or trade their EBTs. And this went on for months. And who knows how much this couple profited, but they're going to be back in court, high bail set for both of them. And it's just really sad all the way around. It's really a story about greed here. This Vietnamese couple, again, allegedly trading fentanyl pills for these food stamp cards, desperately needed. But what this also shows is that there's an absolute lack of any type of oversight, right? The government giving out these food stamp cards, and after that, how it's used is, at the end of the day, how do you track something like that, right? And clearly in this case, the authorities busted a big case, and something I've been following simultaneously. And that's why I have all this footage. I've been doing undercover work in this neighborhood as well. People have offered me food stamp cards for pennies on the dollar. And I'm just stunned at what's happening on some of America's streets right now.
Well, once again, you've found another story which seems micro compared to the scandal of FTX. But this is commonplace, right? I mean, this is not a new story. I mean, I've been seeing the reaction to this particular report. You have folks that have been seeing this going on for not just a few years, but going on, decades. So is this something that you think is prevalent all over the U.S.? And does anyone seem to care because it seems to be kind of petty theft, other than the fact that this couple used drugs to induce the EBD cards, which is unbelievable, actually.
Yeah, I think that's the key piece right there. Of course, this fraud, food stamp fraud, has been going on for decades. It's nothing new. Enforcing and prosecuting, that's the hard part. But personally in my career, I've never seen this. Fentanyl pills, hundreds of fentanyl pills being traded for food stamps. And again, the hustle was allegedly, according to police, this couple would find a homeless person. The homeless person would then go into a local store, in this case, Lamb Seafood, with one of the, EBT, perpetrators, and items would be purchased from meat to soda and so on and so forth. And then once they come out with all the food, the other fella in the car would allegedly give these fentanyl pills wrapped up in, tissues to the homeless guy. and it'll just go on and on and on. It's just this culture that's being allowed. But thankfully, Seattle police, in partnership with Homeland Security and other law enforcement agencies, I think they're trying to send a message here. Enough is enough. So for so long, people have looked the other way, and that's why this neighborhood that is just vulnerable, that's in recovery right now, not only from COVID. Again, this is the Little Saigon neighborhood in Seattle. It's part of the largest Chinatown International District, which is made up of Chinatown, Japantown as well. And this is an area that has seen so many stores close down because of the high crime, because of the drug use, because of COVID, and all the anti-Asian hate. And now this. So, I mean, this is a positive development. The question now is can this momentum continue when it comes to prosecution and arrests?
It's a big story, and it's something that obviously we've seen firsthand. The homeless crisis is not it's not a new development, but clearly this is a new spin on things, and the addictive nature of fentanyl and how cost effective it is, right? Like, it's not very expensive to produce, so they can get these folks their fix and get real cash in return, and leaving these people really in a very tough spot. Have anyone died yet from this? I mean, do you have any information on some of the victims of this crime?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a great question. No numbers on that, but I can say right now it's a fact that Seattle in 2022 has seen a record number of fentanyl overdose deaths on the streets. And the vast majority of those fentanyl overdose deaths are homeless people. And that's one of the greatest tragedies here. We're losing an entire generation to this drug crisis, and you've got this couple allegedly preying on them, this vulnerability to make a few extra dollars. Because these fentanyl pills, first of all, you can get 3 to 4 of them now for $10, right? And they're made by Mexican cartels. They get the ingredients from China. They're so cheap. So the pills you can buy at cost for maybe 30 cents to 50 cents, right? And then you sell them for $2 to $3. It's pure profit. And when you're no longer even trading the cash now for these food stamps, and you're just trading pills, man, it is just pure greed. So I'm glad this happened.
Yeah, I'm just I'm shocked, and yet I'm not surprised that people are exploiting the system that we have. And it's a good thing that this particular situation was at least stopped. And let's hope the other cities around the country that are dealing with this crisis will continue to prosecute the perpetrators. Another story that you broke was not really the story that you intended to cover, but it turned into a national story, and that was a journalist getting robbed right in front of you while you were both covering the same story. Pretty wild situation. It's kind of gone viral all over the country. Tell us about it.
Yeah, look, last week I was, rather this past weekend, I've lost track of days now. I was in Renton, Washington. It's only 15 minutes outside of Seattle, to cover a drag queen story hour. For many of us who've been following this now across the nation, a lot of these bars and libraries have been, allowing, drag queens essentially to read to little kids. So a conservative group wanted to protest this. However, there's threats of potential violence and clashes on the ground because you have far left activists, Antifa members there as well, and the conservatives canceled. But another reporter, her name's Katie Daviscourt, she reports for Rebel News, and I were there on the ground just to kind of see what happened. And Katie went ahead of me, and I show up a little later, and she comes running towards me and says, Jonathan, let me use your phone. She says, I was just assaulted and robbed by an Antifa member, a man dressed up essentially with a black mask and a ninja costume, essentially, because that's kind of the black bloc outfit that's worn at these events. And here's the kicker. There were a couple other reporters and photographers from other mainstream news agencies there, but none of them, according to Katie, would allow her to use their phones to call 911. So, this is some of the coverage that I got at the tail end. But I walked with Katie to the police station to file a police report. So the point is, Antifa is real. far left activism can turn violent, and reporters are being targeted on the ground. And right now, there's an Antifa member on the loose, and there's also a $500 bounty now put out by Rebel News because we still don't know the identity. Katie had her phone stolen; it was recording at the time. So the hope is that these police mobile cameras that were set up on the scene actually got some of the footage. So that's what we're waiting for right now, man.
So the story you went there was this story time hour. I don't know if anyone actually covered that, but this became the story that you ended up following was this theft of the phone, which, in some of this that I've been following, preparing for this segment, it seems that there are folks that are skeptical the theft even took place. What do you have to say to that piece where people are saying, well, did this actually even take place?
Yeah, come on, man. I mean, that's the internet, right? Look, I was there, and that's what's so crazy about the far left. Yeah, you have these, far left activists, and that's what they are. They're extremists, they're militants, they're radicals. They're trying to hijack this message, and what they do is they gaslight, right? They try to deny someone's actual experience of what happened if you're quote unquote on the other side. Katie and I have already unfairly been branded, quote unquote extreme right wing media. Katie openly says she's a conservative. I'm not. I'm an independent journalist, and I'm a moderate at best. And I voted both sides and all sides before. So, anyways, besides, I'm not going to get into politics here right now, but I've kind of been lumped into this category because anyone who reports on Antifa and these kind of, drag queen story times with a, critical lens or just simply scrutinizing what's going on here or questioning that, you're seen as the enemy. You're canceled. And that's kind of what we've been caught up in as reporters here on the ground in Seattle. And that's why Antifa members, these activists, these far left activists, they know who we are. So Katie got spotted right away. And the moment Katie started running towards me, asking me to use my phone, I got outed in the crowd as well. So this is the irony, right? This group, again, they were pushing this trans agenda, and that's fine. You can do whatever you want. They're all about being inclusive, but they wouldn't let me in. And, so much for inclusivity. So I found that quite ironic when all I wanted to do was cover the event.
Well, what do you make of the scrutiny that you get for covering these events? Because I know a lot of people don't believe Antifa is a real group. And I think we both have reporting experience dealing with folks, back when I was covering markets like Santa Cruz. You had a group of masked marauders, all in black, wearing masks. I mean, this is well before COVID, before the pandemic. And so these guys were all dressed up and they were bashing storefront windows, small businesses. And that broke my heart since I grew up in small business. And I was like, what is going on? These are cowards and anarchists. They weren't really branded Antifa, I'd say 15 years ago, but that's I think a fairly new term in recent years. But why have these folks seemingly gone under the radar in terms of scrutiny? Because I know there are people who understand there are extremists on the left, extremists on the right, but these folks don't seem to get kind of a profile for some of the damage that they've done.
Yeah, especially during the BLM riots in the past couple of years. The vast majority of the violence and destruction across the country, at least in the Pacific Northwest, was done at the hands of Antifa. And that's what they do, right? They're really sophisticated in that they mobilize. They know how to mobilize while using social media. And you're absolutely right. They're not an official, group that's registered or anything like that. They're a collective, right? They're loosely fitting pieces, decentralized, and that's the whole point, right? If one, Antifa, cell gets taken out, you have 7 others that'll emerge, and that's the whole point. And with the BLM riots and protests a couple of years ago, that's when I saw for the first time the whole BLM movement, at least here in Seattle on the ground. It wasn't about Black Lives Matter at all. It was used as a Trojan horse. And Antifa used that to go in to cause destruction, because that's what they do. It's a collective of anarchists, of disenfranchised youth, far left activists who use, quote unquote, this direct action to get the attention of authorities. And what they're trying to do is destabilize America. They're anti-capitalism, they're anti-establishment, they're pro-trans, they're pro-LGBTQ, and so on and so forth. They're pro every marginalized group. And again, what I saw, which was insane, was they were using the Black Lives Matter banner and essentially sullying the movement. when that statement Black Lives Matter obviously is something universal that everyone should be getting behind if they're not a racist. But that movement got destroyed partly because of Antifa and the far left, at least here in Seattle and places like Portland, because it was used as cover, right? Think about it. If you criticize Black Lives Matter, it got to a point where a lot of white folks were afraid to even say anything critical, right? Because why? They didn't want to be called racists, right? And Antifa knew that. That's how they play. They're very strategic. And that's what they're doing now with this next agenda they have, which is the whole drag queen story time. Antifa was there in Renton, Washington, essentially to act as security. And that's how they play. They dress up in what's called black bloc. They wear body armor, black helmets. They're essentially wearing ninja cosplay outfits, and they run around and they threaten you, and they intimidate you. And getting back to why aren't we hearing more about it? It's because the mainstream media tends to lean liberal Democrat, and they're just not scrutinizing this group as much as they would the Proud Boys or the Three Percenters or any other right-wing extremist white nationalist group. So there needs to be more consistent coverage.
And in light of the theft, this young lady asked another journalist to use their phone, and they didn't want to get involved, and that turned into a whole commotion. What's the protocol? I mean, obviously, there's the human protocol. Someone's in distress, you let them, you call 911 on their behalf. I mean, I understand that.
Call on their behalf, exactly.
But there's another dynamic that I want you to explain, because why aren't because you're saying there's multiple journalists there from mainstream outlets who used to work out there.
The local CBS station and one from King 5, which is a local NBC affiliate.
Right. So these folks were not comfortable enough to lend even their phone, even on speaker, to this lady who works for a seemingly conservative news outlet. Tell me about that dynamic. Have things gotten so toxic that they'll be branded as extremists if they allow someone to use their phone? I mean, talk about that for a bit, because you're seeing this firsthand.
Right? Yeah, no, absolutely. Guilt by association. I can't look. At the end of the day, I can't get inside a man's heart and mind. So I don't know what motivates somebody, but I know what I saw on the ground. There's video of it as well. A King 5 photographer clearly being asked by Katie, you can see the look in her face, just so distraught. Can you please call 911, or can I use your phone? And you can hear this King 5 photographer saying, hey, look, that's basically your problem. I don't want to get involved. So it's just like mentality of not wanting to get involved. And look, I can't speak for that guy, and I can't speak for the other stations and the other reporters on the ground. But look, I understand they have a job to do. But if somebody's been robbed or assaulted, where's the human decency? Where's just like the basic human decency to just look out for your fellow man? And fine, don't lend this reporter your phone, but take a minute to call 911, get the cops here, and you can still cover your story. So ultimately, I don't know what motivated these people not to allow Katie Daviscourt to use their phone. But again, for me, it was a no-brainer. I saw somebody in distress. I called 911 for her.
Yeah, but I mean, are they going to get a backlash? Like, are they going to go back to the office and get yelled at by their news director for allowing someone to use the corporate phone for a moment to call 911? Like, I can't compute what these people are fearful of. Are they fearful of being branded as conservative or not legitimate if they associate with a person for a moment who needs your phone? I mean, what does that say about journalism and about what's going on actually specifically in Seattle? Because this seems not to be just applicable to Katie, but obviously I've seen the way folks talk about you, at least online, from what little I've seen. I'm sure this is part of that.
Yeah, it's a freaking free-for-all, man. The whole media environment's fractured. Everyone's on their own. No one's looking out for each other now. And this was a case of that, where you know who your friends are during a crisis. And Katie found out really quickly who her friends are on the ground. When it comes to mainstream media, they're on their own. When it comes to independents like me and Katie, we're on our own. We're here to look out for each other. Look, if any of the mainstream media folks were ever in trouble and needed to use my phone, I'm calling 911 for them. I'm letting them use my phone. So.
This reminds me kind of ancillary. We've been covering, we covered the Twitter files recently, and Matt Taibbi and Barry Weiss were both independent journalists that were given access to these files, and they've been releasing.
Who once did work for mainstream, by the way.
They both, yeah. I mean, Rolling Stone and New York Times, yeah, absolutely. But what's interesting is that someone who's working in mainstream now, I saw this thing on Twitter, this guy who works at NBC News, was there blasting Musk releasing the files to these independent journalists. I think he called, we'll have to pull this up, but I think he called Taibbi a substacker in a really kind of derogatory way. Now, the guy himself works at NBC News, which is owned by Comcast. Yeah. So it's not like Comcast has their hands clean. We know how, I know firsthand how Comcast behaves. So I'm just kind of astonished at how journalists are beating one another up in this manner.
Yeah, and like I said, I would retort by saying he's a corporate journalist and he has to answer to his corporate overlord. So, you know, whatever you want to say. Look, I've been called a Twitter journalist since I left mainstream media, right? But I'm arguably more effective on social media right now than I've ever been in my entire 20-plus year career. So, look, times are changing. Clearly, the trust in mainstream media is eroding. So that's why you and I are talking too right now. We can talk about the truth and we can really go after the real story.
And another story we should get into is another case of AAPI hate, but unusual in that it involved a chancellor at a university. Explain the situation, because it's odd for many reasons.
Well, yeah, before we get to this video, the setup here is there was a commencement at Purdue Northwest University in good old Hammond, Indiana. And, you know, there was a guest speaker there who was talking about using a made-up language to kind of, you know, help calm down crying kids. And after the whole commencement speech, you have the chancellor go up, and he essentially starts mocking some fake Asian language. So I want you guys to listen to this right now.
I have a thing on the air, if you ever listen, I sometimes just roll off into a made-up language, and I've taught it to my granddaughter, so if she starts crying, or this baby over here starts crying, I have something for them. It's Ishka Malufka language. And is that kid going to stop? See, did you see that? Just try that. Go in the shower and make up a fake language and then use it on your kids. It works great.
Well, all I can say is, that's sort of my Asian version of his.
What do you make of that, man?
I mean, I don't know what this guy was thinking. Look, I think we discussed this before the show. We've been in scenarios where people act the fool thinking that they are just fine, right? You've talked to people who just use the wrong lingo, if you want to call it that. I mean, I don't know what this guy was thinking. He clearly wasn't thinking. I mean, again, I covered a city council meeting once, and, you know, a city council member literally used the word Oriental, which is gone out of fashion, so to speak, in this country. And I told my news director, hey, you know, I just caught this guy. He said Oriental, and my news director's like, yeah, he's 80 years old. It's fine. You know, the point is, this guy's an old dude. But he's the chancellor of a university. I can't imagine. Obviously, they've apologized and so on and so forth. But I can't even imagine being in a university dynamic where it's so diverse at this point that this would even just come up. But you know, this is what goes on to this day.
Yeah, clearly tone deaf and unaware of what he was doing. I thought what was really telling, though, was the optics behind him. The rest of the stage, the school leaders. I did not see a single person of color there. So I think Purdue Northwest has some work to do when it comes to expanding its ethnic diversity pool there. I think really what was problematic on so many fronts was the fact that it just rolled off his tongue and the others around him. I don't know if it was even nervous laughter or clapping, but, you know, people thought it was no big deal. And I think what was really problematic even more on social media is after the fact that on the school's main YouTube channel, and I called them out today for that. This happened more than nearly a week ago. And they didn't even bother to edit out that segment on the school's official YouTube channel. So the entire insulting, racist moment is still there online. I'm hoping the school actually comes to its senses. They They've apologized, but now you've got to kind of, at the very least, edit this moment out. I mean, you can't, if you leave it up, I understand you want to leave things up for posterity's sake, but come on, this is insulting. This is racist. If somebody used the N-word during a commencement, would you keep it up? Because I would argue for Asian Americans, this racism, this mocking of the language is as insulting as the N-word for Black folk here. So, and the fact that so many online denied the experience of Asian Americans as this being potentially.
Yeah, but Jonathan, what are the repercussions? Like we've talked about this thing flippantly, but is there an Asian Al Sharpton, an Asian Jesse Jackson to go to Purdue and picket and yell at these guys and say, "Hey, this is garbage. Why is this taking place in this day and age?" But of course, we don't have leaders in the Asian American community broadly. South Asian certainly. I mean, I know Cal Penn, the actor, jokingly said, "Hey, maybe I'll be the brown Al Sharpton." But the reality is, unless you hold people accountable, which is what journalists are supposed to do also, but we don't have civil rights leaders marching at Purdue or any other place. I mean, that's why this stuff happens.
The journalists aren't doing it, and at the end of the day, the Asian American community and the leaders, I'm using broad brushstrokes and gross generalizations. So many of us were so busy. Hey, just keep your head down. Let's keep making money. Let's keep getting our A's. But I mean, this has been normalized, and that's the point, right? And that's why this chancellor of a university in Indiana, schools are supposed to be about diversity and being, just open-minded, and this happens in 2022, and it barely makes a blip when it comes to, mainstream media coverage. It's just unbelievable.
We have this dichotomy where universities get criticized for being too left, right? Like too progressive, to use a term you've used, like too woke or whatever. But then you have this other side where you have guys who are using language that's ridiculous. And so I don't know how to explain it, because people are mad at the left and people are mad at the right. And the racism and the classism and the sexism. This is why it's so challenging for those of us who are
a double standard, right? And society, and again, the majority culture continues to pick winners and losers, right? So if it's racism towards Black folk, right? Hey, there's a BLM movement, and we got to stand with our brothers and sisters, and we need allies. When it comes to Asian Americans, who are still dealing with Asian hate, and this is a perfect segue into our segment, which I'll let you, intro. When it comes to Asian Americans, no one's talking about it, yet Asian hate continues to happen.
That's right. And by the way, this Asian hate segment is sponsored by the California Public Library, a state of California initiative. We're glad to bring these stories to you because, I mean, without us going out of our way, you wouldn't have heard the story. It's a blip on social media for a moment, and then it disappears, and the next thing happens. And I don't know how far and wide this little egregious action took place, but this is commonplace. It's not just an isolated issue, and unfortunately, and this was a chancellor of university. So I want to bring up one more thing before we go here. We were talking about FTX, and I forgot to bring up something that I thought was really important of this story, which I want the audience to really pay attention to. How Sam Bankman Fried gets treated, I think, is really, really important, because this guy doused our system with cash. And when I say our system, I'm talking about all these politicians, not just Democrats, but Republicans too. Not just them directly, but through super PACs, through dark money. And then on top of that, there's all these levels of media where he actually is considered a founder of a new media company called Semaphore. Now, they've denounced any involvement, but let's face it, when there's some money that comes in, especially from a founder, that's a big deal. He gave money to Vox. He gave money to all these different institutions.
There's another news org in the crypto industry called, I think, Block, right?
Right. Absolutely.
That as well.
And I want to pull this up, and I want to give credit to the folks at Popular Information. It's a newsletter. It's hard to track all this stuff in terms of not only the data. Some of this stuff is public, but the dark money, which SBF has gone, at least in some media circles, he would go on like Twitter Spaces and talk openly about what he was doing. But he gave money to a whole bunch of politicians. So 25 politicians, a mixture of Democrats and Republicans, have pledged to donate or return money from the FTX executives. So that's one aspect. But there's a whole other bunch of folks that have stayed quiet. And so that includes the House Majority PAC, which received $6 million. Okay, so then you have Mitch McConnell's Super PAC, the Senate Leadership Fund, which received $1 million from FTX. $2.5 million also came from Ryan Salame, the co-CEO. Salame was funding more to the GOP side. There's also the Democratic National Committee, which got $865,000 from Bankman Fried, and the NRCC, which got $184,000 and change from FTX executives, plus the DCCC. So you name this across the board, it's mucky. And going back to the point that we made during the segment, it's the timing of his arrest is interesting because he was potentially scheduled to testify before Congress. And now will they cut a backroom deal and say, hey, confess to XYZ crime. We'll give you a sweetheart sentence, given that it's white collar. Yes, we lost a few $1 billion, but it's fine. Thanks for the cash. You go sit down in Club Fed. We'll figure out another solution, but we want to keep our cash. That's, I think, what everyone needs to pay attention to in the FTX story. Where did this cash go? How much influence it had on the media and politicians? We need to watch this story like a hawk.
Let's stay on it then.
We will. For Jonathan Choe, I'm Ravi Kapur. That's been Protected Speech. We'll see you again next week.